Hi children, welcome to the next class, module 11, that is the expenditure method of measuring national income. Now, how do we define the expenditure method? This method measures national income as the sum total of final expenditures incurred by the households, business firms, government and foreigners. This total final expenditure is equal to GDP at MP. So the sum total of the final expenditure is equal to GDP at MP. This method is also known as the income disposal method. Now, as discussed earlier, there are three methods. So first of all, we produce goods and services. Production generates income and income leads to expenditure. So therefore, the income so generated is finally disposed of on the expenditure on the various goods and services. Now coming to what are the steps involved in estimating national income according to the expenditure method. Now the first step is to identify the economic units which make the final expenditure. And for this, we classify our economy into four sectors. The first sector is the household sector. The second is the producing sector or the business sector. Then comes the government sector, and the last sector is the rest of the world sector. The next step is the classification of final expenditure made by the four sectors of the economy which have already been stated in step 1. Now the first sector was the household sector, and the expenditure made by the household sector is known as private final consumption expenditure, represented as C. Now how do we define private final consumption expenditure? It measures the market value of goods and services purchased by the households and non-profit institutions serving households during an accounting year. So when we're talking about the expenditure made on the final goods, so we refer to the expenditure made on the durable goods, the semi-durable goods, and also the services. Now the second was the government expenditure. Now this is the expenditure which is made by the government sector, and the expenditure made by the government is known as government final consumption expenditure, represented as G. Now what is this expenditure? It is incurred by the general government to satisfy collective wants of the people. Example, government expenditure on health, education, law and order. Now, the third sector is the business sector, and the expenditure made by the business sector is known as gross domestic capital formation or gross investment, which is represented as I. Now, this is again split up into two parts. Part A, which is known as gross fixed capital formation, and the second part is inventory investment. Now coming to the first part, which is again split up into three parts. So now the first one, that is gross business fixed investment. It is defined as expenditure on fixed assets, example machinery, equipments and factory buildings, etc. Now the second one is gross residential construction investment. It is the amount spent on construction of flats and residential houses. And the third one is gross public investment. Now this is the investment which is made by the government, and the expenditure made by the government is on hospitals, schools, roads, dams, etc. Now coming to the second part of gross domestic capital formation is inventory investment, which is also referred to as change in stocks. It is the difference between closing stock and opening stock of inventories like raw materials, semi-finished goods and finished goods. And the next component of the final expenditure, which is made by the rest of the world sector, is net exports, which is the difference between exports minus imports. Now, how do we define it as? It is the difference between value of exports and value of imports. Exports refer to expenditure made by foreigners on the purchase of Indian products, and imports refer to expenditure made by the residents on the purchase of foreign goods. Goods to be imported are not produced in the domestic territory, hence subtracted. The difference between the two is net exports. Now this is a table which shows gross domestic capital formation, the expenditure which is made by the business firms. Now the expenditure made by the businessmen is of two types. One is gross fixed investment and the other is inventory investment. As already discussed, gross fixed investment is again split up into three parts. Investment made on fixed assets like machinery, the investment made on residential houses, and the investment made by the government on dams, bridges, parks, and railways. And the other one is your inventory investment, which refers to change in stock, which is closing stock minus the opening stock. Now, how do we measure final expenditure? So, sum total of the four items gives us the value of GDP at MP. So, GDP at MP is equal to private final consumption expenditure, that is C, plus government final consumption expenditure, that is G, plus gross domestic capital formation, that is I, plus change in stock, that is inventory investment, plus net exports. So we say GDP at MP is equal to C plus G plus I plus X minus M. The fourth step is to calculate domestic income, that is NDP at FC. Now we have already calculated GDP at MP. So the next step is to arrive at NDP at FC from GDP at MP. So what do? We make an allowance for depreciation and net indirect taxes from GDP at MP. That is, we subtract depreciation and NIT from GDP at MP so as to arrive at NDP at FC. The last step is the calculation of national income, that is NNP at FC. We have already calculated NDP at FC. So in order to calculate NNP at FC, we add NFIA to NDP at FC so as to get NNP at FC. NNP at FC is nothing but national income. So we have calculated national income by the expenditure method. So we need to take a few precautions when we are estimating national income according to the expenditure method. So therefore there are a list of items which should be included, and there are a list of items which should not be included. So coming to the list of items which should be included. So we always take into consideration the expenditure on final goods and services and the expenditure on brokerage on shares and bonds. That is, when the share brokers sell shares and bonds, their brokerage should be taken into consideration. And when people sell or purchase the second-hand goods, the houses or the cars, the commission on the sale and purchase of second-hand goods should be taken into consideration. But the following items should not be included. For example, the expenditure on intermediate goods should not be included because we take into account only the value of your final goods and services. The expenditure made on transfer payments such as old age pensions and scholarships. With this, we come to an end of the topic, the measurement of national income according to the three methods, that is the value added, the income method and the expenditure method. All the three methods give the same estimate of national income. Each method is important in its own way as it refers to different approaches to study national income. Thank you.